invited people to email questions. So we've got a number of questions that have been emailed to us that have been picked up fairly random. And then each one of the candidates is going to take a go at answering first one of the 5 questions. And then as it goes round, hopefully each of them will have the chance to speak first and to speak last on each question. And they are fairly broad, and if you have put a question in and it's not asked tonight, we do apologise, but obviously there's more questions that have been asked to us than we've had the time or the opportunity to deal with. But hopefully we will get through quite a lot. So that's enough of an introduction, because we need to just get on with the business of the evening. And so what we're going to do for starters is I'm just going to ask each candidate very briefly for a minute or two just to say who they are, who their party is, and why we should vote for them. I'm going to start with Jade.
Evening, I'm Jade Marston. I'm from South Liverpool, so not too far. My dad's actually from here, grew up. I did an apprenticeship when I was 17, left school, and now I'm a housewife with 2 beautiful children. My mum's worked in the NHS for 45 years, and my dad's currently a civil servant just down the road. What I really see as my vision for Bootle is to get a lot more investment into the small shops and just get them thriving again. And also we need to support the docks that need to be opened, more readily to international business.
Thank you. James, the Conservative Party candidate. Okay, so back to you.
Hello, good evening everybody. My name is Peter Dowd. I'm a leader of Sefton Council. Some people may know that. I'm the leader of Sefton Council. I've been a member of the Labour Party for over 35 years. I've worked here, lived here, and in a sense, that's that situation where we've got an election, which I think we all agree, and certainly most candidates agree, is absolutely crucial for the future of Britain and the potential change in political landscape in Britain. And I believe that the Labour Party, which tends to be embedded in communities, is the party to sort of take us forward in this country in the current circumstances. I hope that we will get the opportunity not to tease some of those particular issues out. So, and can I just say, when I refer to Bootle, I often refer to it as the Bootle Constituency rather than Bootle, because this isn't Bootle, this is Crosby, and this has not been in this, you haven't been in the Bootle Constituency for long. And so for me, it's about the whole community of the Bootle Constituency, Seaforth, Netherton, Ford, Crosby, etc. So Bootle, I think, is the short word.
My name is Peter Glover. I represent the Trade Unionists and Socialist Coalition. It's a new party that was founded by Bob Crow, who was the leader of the Rail and Maritime Trade Union. And in this election, we're standing, a great number of candidates up and down the country. You probably haven't heard us because the BBC have frozen us out. Nevertheless, we've got a number of candidates in council elections as well. We had a party political broadcast because we crossed the threshold that entitled us representation. Of course, I think there's been one interview that was with Andrew Neil, with Dave Nellis, who's leading the coalition at the present time. Dave Nellis was a former Labour MP who refused to pay his poll tax back in the 80s, was expelled from the Labour Party. And now we have a situation where we have a new party on the left, we believe, that's rising, called Tusk. Similar to Peter, I've lived in Bootle all my life, and I'm a teacher, and I'm a member of the National Union of Teachers, and I'm also the National Executive of the NUT for Merseyside and Cheshire. Thank you.
I'm Paula Keaveney. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate. I'm actually not in the Bootle constituency, in the one next door, which is Sefton Central. I live in Liverpool. I work in Edgehill University, where I teach politics and public relations. But before that, I worked for a number of charities. Some were national, like Save the Children Fund and Refugee Council, and some were local, like Autism Initiatives in Chesterfield Road in Crosby. I've been very lucky in my career because moving to a number of charities has given me knowledge of all sorts of things. I've been to some of the poorest countries in the world. I've worked with communities suffering poverty. I've developed an understanding of disability. And I think this all helps in what you're looking for in an MP, because I'm somebody with a broad range of experience. I'm going to date myself now. I got involved in politics at university in 1981. That was when the SDP was founded, and I was in the SDP and then went into the Liberal Democrats at merger. I will try and also answer questions on behalf of my Bootle colleague David Newman, but if there are questions coming up that are personal opinion type questions, I will have to be giving my own personal opinions rather than his, so I hope you'll forgive me for that.
Good evening everyone, and happy May Day, International Workers' Day. My name is Lisa Tallis and I'm the Green Party candidate for Bootle Constituency. It's great to see so many of you here when you could be out somewhere on a Friday night having fun, or certainly at home doing so. I have lived in Seaforth for 11 years. I've worked in the educational sector for over 20 years now, and that includes higher education, further education, and latterly over 10 years as a school teacher. So I've seen with my own eyes, and I've had my heart broken by the damage that has been done by privatisation of our public services in this country. That was the main reason that I decided to join the Green Party. I think really it got to a point with me where just the level of people in poverty in this country, the attacks on the poor and vulnerable, the decimation of public services, and the complete disregard for our environment, coupled with a focus on getting the deficit down rather than decency, meant that I had to stand up, even in the face of my own disability. I wanted to do something. So that's why I'm here tonight. Really happy to answer your questions, and I really hope you'll vote green on the 7th of May. Thank you.
Take the mic back to this end. Lisa just said, you know, we could be doing something else on Friday night. I mean, whether I'm weird, I've been really looking forward to this for weeks. I suppose Everton, I'm a lawyer, so I suppose I've got other social problems as well. So without more ado, we'll get straight into the questions. And obviously you want to hear from the candidates, so we're going to get through the first 5 questions, with them taking turns of dealing and answering the questions, and then we're going to have an open time after that. So if you could just listen to the answers to the first section, and then Jackie's got a microphone, there will be the opportunity for open questions a little bit later on. So question 1, so the way it's going to happen is each one is going to have a go at answering 1 or 5 questions first. So Jade's going to take the first go at, has austerity gone too far, or is short-term pain worth it for long-term gain? Jade goes first.
Okay. The truth is we needed to deal with the country's finances. It was in a mess, and we can't leave that to our children to deal with, because I know personally I'd feel terrible if my child couldn't get a home in 20 years because our country was just in too much of a state. But we need to be careful not to make the most vulnerable people pay for that, which is why the Conservatives have been increasing the state pension year on year and will continue to do so. Also, you know, the above inflation increase in the minimum wage, it's things like this that will help people. But I think it's wrong to think that just giving people money constantly is actually going to benefit them in the long term. They need to be getting more help to get jobs. But in Bootle, I think there is a problem with unemployment, and we need to seek out the investment to get them jobs there for them to be taken.
Has austerity gone too far? Short term with the long term. Well, I think austerity has certainly gone too far in our neck of the woods. As the leader of the council, I've used the word presided over a budget cuts of £114 million over the past 5 years, with a potential £55 million over the next 2 years, I think, depending upon which government gets into power. So certainly with regard to our constituency, I think austerity has gone too far and it needs to be completely rebalanced. And my starting point with regards to this locally is a fairer redistribution of the resources we get. Not handouts, not, you know, here's the Northwest, here's Merseyside, it's whinging about getting more money, it's always complaining about not having enough. It isn't that. We, in our borough, have had about 5, 6, up to 7 times the amount of cuts places like Dorset have had in the age of austerity. And I think it's about time that was rebalanced. So for me, austerity has gone too far, and it's certainly gone too far in our area. And And so the Labour Party are committed to rebalancing that. I can, if we have got time, go on to talk about the national perspective, because I think they're both inextricably linked. So in regards to us, at a local level, what we'd have is the rebalancing of the pot that's already there, and then the aim, in relation to economic growth at a national level, to get that pot bigger, because I think that's what this country needs. It needs a bigger economy, it needs more money in the economy, more resources then are able to be used for our vital services, which have been dreadfully attacked in this particular constituency. So yes, I think austerity for us has gone far too far.
I suppose there have been three moments in history when, the word austerity, which means reducing the size of the state, have had significant impacts on the world. The first one, you would say, the first austerity that I've ever seen was around 1870 to 1893. That was actually called the Great Depression, before the Great Depression of the 1930s. And the solution then was state spending on warships and the expansion to Africa. The second bout of austerity was the 1930s, when Andrew Mellon, who was the Secretary of State to the Treasury in America, said liquidate capital, liquidate labour, liquidate everything. They thought that capitalism had these kind of self-restorative mechanisms, and somehow capitalism would be restored due to after a bout of unemployment, pain and so on. And that bout of pain and suffering lasted throughout the 1930s, created fascism and created the Second World War. And what got America, what got the world out of austerity of the 1930s, partly was the war of destruction, but also America spent 42% of its GDP. That is essentially state spending as well. That's always the trigger to a new boom under capitalism. What we've got now, we have a similar, we're just about to escape tremendous. How long have we got?
All right, yeah.
Sorry, yeah. You're not going to use it. That's not and so in 2007, 2008, we came very, very close to the 1930s style depression. And the answer, unfortunately, or rather I should say fortunately, Bush and the administration of Britain decided to use liquid assets and print money to get the world out of the crisis. But it's only a temporary measure under capitalism. That's why only socialism can end this cycle of permanent depression. And that is why we really call for TUSK, we call for a social society, and an end to, in Gordon Brown's word, boom and bust. You'll always have boom and bust under capitalism, and only socialism will solve that underlying problem that leads to things like austerity.
Thank you.
Well, I think it would be foolish not to admit that the economy was in a very bad state and action had to be taken to try and pull things round. And that's why I'm glad the Liberal Democrats decided to go into coalition and actually step up to the mark and try and get something done about this. Do I think austerity's gone too far? I suspect we're at the point now where we do need to relax it a bit. But actually, some good things have already been done. The raising of the income tax threshold, for example, a Lib Dem policy, is a way in which people are now being able to keep more of the money that they are earning for themselves. But this is also about political choices. It's certainly true that there have been cuts in money that have gone to local government. Nobody can deny that. But it's important that politicians also choose wisely what they do with the resources they have. And I'm going to give you two examples. One is reasonably local and one is national. I was on the council in Liverpool. I was the leader of the opposition. And we had a budget coming up and there were all sorts of cuts being suggested. This was all being blamed on the government, of course. Two of the cuts were school uniform grants. That's money for the poorest families in Liverpool to pay for school uniforms, and money for mental health services. I discovered the then leader of the council had £750,000 in a separate fund that he just spent on his say-so. Some of that money was going on civic ceremonies with catering. So I moved at the budget meeting that we abolish that fund and we spend that money to keep the school uniform grants and the mental health services. You would have thought I was suggesting the slaughter of the firstborn, the way they actually reacted. But it's about choice. Second national choice, in an age where money is tight, we need to look at what national government spends as well. I think there is no justification for the replacement of Trident. You know, actually, even if it costs nothing, I'd be against replacing it, but it certainly costs a lot, and there are lots of different ways that money could be used.
I really like this question as a start-off. Has austerity gone too far? Really, the question, I think, needs to be thought of in terms of whether we can afford austerity. That may be quite an odd way around to put it, but if you look at what the economists call externalities, what military types might call collateral damage, what people of a more green persuasion might call offsets, all the damage that has been done to the poorest and most vulnerable people, the knock-on effects of that getting the deficit down, trying to pay down the national debt, which has actually surged up to 1.5 trillion during the previous government. If we think about all the areas that that's spilled over into, so things like the NHS, things like pressure on housing, with so many people being made homeless under the bedroom tax, things like mental health crisis, things like difficulties with policing whenever people with addiction problems strike out and you commit crimes because of the dire straits that they're in. If we look at all kinds of areas of society, the knock-on costs are way, way over what we can point out as savings. So whilst for the coalition it was maybe looking good on the spreadsheet, actually in real life, in real world terms, the cost of austerity in Britain has been extremely high, and it's just fobbing off those costs onto a different area where they don't have to be looked at, sweeping it under the rug. So personally, I think austerity should never have happened. I think we had an opportunity in 2008 to say, sorry, no to the banks, like Iceland did, a country which is now thriving. And unfortunately it slipped through our fingers because of the government that we had at the time, but the door should have been slammed on austerity many years ago, and the reason that it hasn't been is because too many people are making a lot of money out of squeezing the poor and squeezing the vulnerable. So yeah, it's gone way too far and it should never have even started.
What I think we might do, just to vary it a bit, if we move on to the next question, which is more to do with how our members of Parliament will operate as our servants in our community. And it's going to be, they may want to comment on each other's comments, and some of you out there might want to ask questions or make comments in relation to what's been said. And because we're quite a cosy group, I think we do have the opportunity to do that. So we've got to the second question, which Peter Dowd will take the lead on. And after that, we'll have a bit more of a sort of open time with opportunities for questions and comments. No, I'll ask the question. So the question is, as MP for this constituency, how will you balance your service to the community with the demands of meeting the national political expectations of your party?
Well, actually, the position of the Labour Party is that we're in effect a team. That's it. What happens in the Labour Party, we don't get edicts down from the centre saying you must do this, you must do that, you must do the other. We're all part of the development of that particular policy, and we have our robust debates about what that policy should be, and eventually we form that policy. But I wouldn't like anybody to get the idea that someone's sitting down in London sending edicts and messages down to me saying you must do this, you must do that, you must do the other. By the way, we don't give the monkeys about what's happening locally and what your local people need. You must do this. It doesn't quite work like that. In fact, it just doesn't work like that. So, as an MP, I'd have and would have that effectively that symbiotic relationship with our with my local party, and I have a say in what goes on in policy, as does my local party. So, in that, how do I balance the service of my community with the demands of meeting the national political expectations of your party? They are not mutually exclusive. That implies the national party politics are different than the local party politics. Now that's not to say we don't have challenges, and it doesn't mean to say that we don't have clashes. That's inevitable in any party which is a democratic party. But it's about the close working relationships locally linked into the city region and then linked into the national perspective as well. So I just want to emphasise that it isn't about mutual exclusivity, it's about working together as a political party, and working together as a political party as and when we need to with other political parties, which we've done in the council for many years because it was a home council for 25 years, and with local businesses. So it isn't, to reaffirm, it isn't simply about somebody down at HQ sending edicts down that we have to fulfil. It isn't like that.
I think there are kind of three parts to this. The first part would be every candidate who signs up to be a Tusk candidate has to promise that they will not pass on any of the cuts to the community they represent. Therefore, what Tusk's slogan is, better to break the law than to break the poor. And that was a slogan that was kind of on the banners, literally on the banner of Liverpool City Council in the 1980s, before, unfortunately, many of those, in fact all of those councillors, were kicked out of office undemocratically by a district auditor, and then were kicked out of office by the Labour Party undemocratically. But nevertheless, I think that legacy in this area does live on, and that is why in the first instance, you must have been a Tusk candidate, and I believe that is the way forward. That will restore people's faith in politics when they see people who are prepared not to pass on the cuts at the risk of them losing their office, at the risk of those people being kicked out of office. I think that is, I think when people see that kind of genuine ability to empathise and be part of the community, that's the first part of the question. The second thing is, as an MP, again, back in the tradition of the 80s, and people like Dave Nellis, who stood for Labour then, they said they would stand as a workers' MP on a workers' wage, because, and this relates to the third part, I think you have to be on a wage that relates to the constituents that you represent. Now I'm a teacher, and we're all kind of think that we should be better paid, but nevertheless, if I become an MP, I would not expect to be paid any more than a teacher, because if you do accept the salary and if you become a minister, I just think you lose contact with the constituents that you represent. And thirdly, if you look at the levels of poverty and deprivation in this part of the world, it is very, very easy to forget the difficulties of what it is like to pay the gas bill, to struggle to pay the electricity bill, and to struggle, if you're facing benefit sanctions, to not understand those. So you have to be rooted in community, and that is why I think when you want to be a Tusk candidate, please approach me at the end. But they're the kind of principles and ideas that Tusk is looking for in individuals to represent the party.
Well, I've been the leader of a Lib Dem group, so I'm more than anybody, I'm aware that Lib Dems are very independent-minded, and it can be like herding cats at times. And I mean, that's the way we approach things. We expect our members and our MPs actually to think for themselves and to challenge, and I would expect that to run throughout the parliamentary party's life, but also my political life as well. Interestingly, this question asks about national expectations. Well, the national expectation of the Lib Dems is that every MP is a really, really hard-working constituency MP. That is, working at the ground level is actually what we are expected to do and what we love to do. So that the two meld together very well. I want to talk a bit about mechanisms, though, because it's all very well saying, oh yes, we'll balance this and we'll listen to local people, but I think you need to think about how that will be done. Certainly, when I was a local councillor, I did a lot of street surgeries. That's basically saying, I'm going to be at this street on this day, come and talk to me. I did a lot of surveys, I did a lot of emailing people, all to get a sense of what local feeling was and what local needs were. Through that, I actually discovered the best information source was the local laundrette, which is probably a learning point, but that needs to be done. But you can also do it at a higher level. There's a Lib Dem MP called Andrew George in Cornwall. He recently came very high in the ballot for a private member's bill, which is the opportunity to put a law through Parliament. He had 4 or 5 ideas for the topic, but But instead of just choosing them himself, he surveyed his constituents, said, look, which one is the most important for you? And he then piloted the subject that was most important to his constituents. And I like to do those sorts of things because actually that gives people a bit of a voice at a national level, at a policy level, as well as at a local level. And I think making the two work together is really, really important.
As a member of the Green Party, I'm very lucky because not only do we not believe in the principle of having a whip who tells members of the party how to vote at anything from council right up to MP level, and never will do, and I think the vast amount of our now 70,000 strong membership would leave were that the case. We also all make policy, so you can join the Green Party from anything as low as a fiver if you're a student, right up in reflection of your annual income, and you can come along to conference and you can make policy. And for autumn conference, we're looking into actually enabling people to vote remotely on all policy because we're running out of venues big enough to hold all the members that we've got now. We're getting up to kind of Wembley Stadium type levels, which is probably not a good use of money. So yeah, we're looking into kind of digital voting and other foolproof ways of doing that. But there will be obviously tight scrutiny of how that's done. I think in terms of balancing being a good constituency MP with following national policy, if I were elected MP, I am free to make my own interpretation of national policy as it applies to people in Bootle, so that's great. And if you're wanting a good example of a constituency MP, I give you Caroline Lucas, MP of the year 2014, who has achieved an incredible amount, both down in Brighton Pavilion, where she works, and also in bringing in all kinds of bills, again, looking out for the most vulnerable and most maligned people in society. So things such as refusing any cuts to the Independent Living Funds, getting a bill through to repeal the dreadful Health and Social Care Act, and many environmental measures that she's taken as well, in addition to what she's done for people on the streets in and around Brighton Pavilion. So I think for myself, one real lesson that I've learned during this campaigning time is that there are many, many different ways to connect with people. So on the streets is the best, face-to-face is the best, but a lot of people have got in touch with me by online means, both through Facebook, which I would strongly discourage from joining as a teacher, it's incredibly frowned upon, but also through email campaigns, through 38 Degrees, through Positive Money, through groups like that, which raise kind of topical interests, and by writing personalised and detailed replies to those things, I've actually got in touch with people who've done a heck of a lot for the party just in this short space of time. That's been great as well. I think as well as having one-to-one surgeries as a constituency MP, it's really important to hold group meetings where a lot of people can air their views at the same time, because it makes the best use of time and it allows people in the constituency to hear a range of views. So what I would do is hold a monthly meeting, and the agenda would be set by email by everybody writing in beforehand, and so we would choose the top 5 topics by time and have a 2-hour meeting once a month. So I think that would get the right combination of face-to-face time and also being available by other means of communication.
As an MP, I think community should always come first, no matter what. I think the other two main parties, the Lib Dems and Labour, we're being unrealistic if we're saying we're not going to get whipped to agree with what's going on. But it's whether you can stand up for your community and say, no, actually, I don't agree with that. And I think that's what I would always do. I'd always listen to the constituents. I'd be out there talking to each and every person I possibly could, and just get the right answer and get the right deal for Bootle.
Thank you very much. Right, I think just to vary it a bit, I think we'll get some questions from the floor if there are any, and ask the candidates to comment on each other's
partnership with your main parties. Do you think that the demise of two-party politics in the UK is something that you welcome, and do you think it is to the benefit of the people or to the detriment of the people?
You're going to view from the two people, the two main parties, or the three main parties, and then maybe the new kids.
Well, given that I'm a Democrat, yes, I welcome the challenge of any party, new party, whatever it is. It's a matter in a democracy to encourage plurality, and I think on that basis, yes, I completely welcome that. And that's the point, like tonight, where you go out and you try to make a case, you make it in different forums. But I absolutely welcome the plurality that's developing. And just before the meeting, Lisa and me were a little bit of chat about that very thing. What does it actually mean? And as an example, very quickly, I also mentioned this. I was in Poland not long after the fall of the wall, and of course they had the communist regime for 50 years at that particular point or more. And in Gdansk, where I was, there was a political party fest. It got to about 120 odd parties just in Gdansk, and eventually it came down to about 23 parties. And then it consolidates slightly less than that, around 12 parties. And that's almost the way things happen. So yes, absolutely, I welcome the plurality of the political system, as it appears to be developing.
Any of the candidates, I'm not going to ask every candidate to comment on that question all night, but about one from the smaller party and one from
Thanks.
coalition.
I think anybody who watched the leaders' question time last night, Peter, would be very interested in what the Labour leader Ed Miliband said about not going into any form of coalition with the SNP and not doing any deals and wanting to win outright. And what he said has led a lot of people to be talking today about the idea of a grand coalition, which would be Labour going into coalition with the Conservatives. How would you feel if that was?
We do have a question about coalitions on the list, so we can all be thinking about that one. And,
Okay.
Okay, so the question is, do we welcome the sort of breakdown of the two-party system? Absolutely. Although I've got to say, I was at university in 1979, and there were a lot of commentators then arguing that the two-party system has died. And actually what that election showed was a retrenchment of the two-party system. So I think it'll take a few elections before we're absolutely sure that we are operating in genuinely a multi-party situation. But I think multi-party situations are good for lots of reasons, because actually they force us to do grown-up politics. When you only really have two main camps, the tendency is for campaign to say A and campaign to say definitely not A. A is the worst thing in the world. We can't have A, we want B. And then of course the other party says no, B would be a disaster. We must have A. Because having just two main blocks perpetuates that style of politics. So if we have more of a multi-party system, we are forced to be more grown up, which is always a good thing. Forced to make more compromises. The only thing I have a problem with is I've always been uneasy about the idea of compromises having to be made in a very non-transparent way. Now, I know that in some cases negotiations do have to be kept secret, but I wouldn't want to see a situation where actually everything from now on consisted of people going away secretly agreeing a number of different deals and then telling us afterwards. So I think with a multi-party system has to come transparency of decision-making. The two have to go together.
I said I wasn't going to ask everybody, but we can't leave Victoria, so we can't leave Jade out. So, I don't know if you want to comment on this.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea in principle that we've got all the parties involved, but I think the bigger question is how would we go about doing that? You know, we can have politicians agreeing between themselves, but ultimately it should just be down to the public. You know, if you look at the European elections, they just don't work for the public really. You end up with
surely if you accept plurality, please accept the meaning of the word, not the pronunciation, there would have to be quite major reform to the voting system, because first past the post only favours, you know, the few, and it does not give representation to the vast numbers that we now appear to be standing for Parliament. So, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in fact, if I'd had a question, that would be it, is that we are going to have plurality unless we have a different voting system. Does anybody want to comment on it? Go right along the table, but maybe a couple of comments for me.
Okay, I'll be very quick. The last resolution we passed at the Green Party Liverpool Spring Conference was that if we were a majority government on the 8th of May, the first thing we would do in the first 5 days of that Parliament would be to dissolve that Parliament and call a PR election. So that's where we stand on that. The issue with PR is that if you look at the way the polls are going now, if we had some kind of PR arrangement in the UK, you would probably end up with around about 25% Green, 25% UKIP, and the rest of the votes spread between the other supposedly main parties. So it would look like a very, very different map of Britain if we brought that into legislation very quickly. So I personally am rather sceptical about, for example, the Lib Dem commitment to any form of alternative voting anymore, because they were squashed quite heavily by David Cameron when they brought that in, after going into coalition in 2010. And Nick Clegg has recently spoken out that he has revised his views and is leaning more towards first past the post now. And as far as I know, Conservatives and Labour have got absolutely no commitment whatsoever to changing the first past the post system here, even though we see that it works very well in Scotland and it works very well in Ireland for their governments. So, who knows?
Okay, thank you. Paul and then Peter.
Nick Clegg remains committed to our policy, which is a policy of single transferable vote, which is possibly the purest form of proportional representation. As Lisa's pointed out, we do have forms of proportional voting in some parts of our nation. So it's not as if it's not been done, and it's not as if people can't do it. John Cleese did a famous broadcast about this years ago and said, yes, proportional voting is really difficult. If you can't count up to 5, you won't be able to do it. So those arguing against it normally argue that it's really, really difficult and it can't be done. We are very committed. In fact, it's been party policies almost before I can remember the policy being developed. But it does, it would actually encourage more pluralism, which is a good thing. I mean, obviously we are beginning to get pluralism without it, which is interesting, but it would encourage more pluralism, and I think that does need to be encouraged. My bet, if I had to put a bet on, would be that after this election, there will be a lot more people arguing that it's a good thing than there have been up to date. And it will be interesting to see who those people are.
Well, it's interesting, really, that I think, 4 years ago, when the coalition government got in, we had a referendum, effectively on whether we wanted to change the voting system, and pretty overwhelmingly we decided we didn't want to do it. So the question goes back to the public. It's for you to decide that, but the public not long ago decided pretty convincingly that they wanted things to stand the way they are. Now there's an argument set out, we should have put it back so we'd have had a bigger debate, but that's the decision that was made. Now I have experience of working in an all-party situation. Sefton Council was a home council for the best part of 25 years, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, but the dreadful fear I have, and I think this is to some extent has happened with the current coalition, frankly, is it cherry picks what it wants to do for particular parts of the country. So in our particular case, and I had this experience in Sefton Council, the south end of the borough, when the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats were effectively in control, you couldn't get any decisions to move on any services at all in the north of the borough. It was very difficult to do anything at all, even down to, for example, Rotten Row, where it took us years to get to the stage where we weren't paying full-time for a whole group of people just to keep those flower beds in place, when community centres in the south of the borough and schools in the south of the borough were being closed. So yes, by all means, let's have a coalition, if you want, all. Let's get to the stage where there is multi-party agreements. But believe you me, my experience sometimes of those arrangements, places get stitched up, and I think in relation to the current government with the Liberal Democrat coalition, the likes of Merseyside and the likes of Manchester and parts of the north of England have been absolutely stitched up in terms of the amount of cuts that we've had compared, and the facts are there for you to see, compared to down south. So yes, but be very, very careful what you wish for in these sorts of situations.
Okay, thanks. We will move on, and we'll give the opportunity on this one. I'll make sure it evens out as it goes on. So we'll go back to our questions that have been sent to us, and it's Pete Glover's turn to go first on this one. And the question is, given that climate change is the greatest threat to humanity, what immediate steps would your party take to minimise its effects?
I think I do accept the premise of the question, which is climate change being the greatest kind of external threat to humanity, maybe with the exception of asteroid impact. I think there are three threats. There's one, the asteroid impact. I do think that's, could wipe us off the planet. I think climate change also, if that doesn't get us, then climate change really is an extremely serious threat to humanity. And at the last hustings that we had in Bootle, in the general election, actually I was on the platform then as well, and we also had the pleasure of Paul Nuttall from UKIP, and I did confront Paul Nuttall directly with this question, and I said to Paul, you are a climate change denier, and Paul Nuttall said, well, there's no such thing as man-made climate change, and these people are now opinion formers in their society. I did say to him, I said, I've got really good evidence to prove you wrong, Paul. I said, my cousin Jeff Toon, he works for NASA, he's Oxford PhD, he works for NASA, and his job, Google him, is name dropping here. He's, do you know what I'm talking about climate change? He works for NASA's Orbiting Carbon Observatory, and he measures the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, and every time we see him, maybe once a year, we say, Jeff, what's the score? And he's being a scientist, is extremely cautious about, coming to any conclusions. But, it's the idea that, one or two mavericks are going to determine the fate of humanity because people like Paul Nuttall and so on, by climate change. It really is, it defies reason. And I think we really have to take these people, politicians, upbraid them, and we've really got to forcibly express our opinions about this, which comes to what would we do? And I think the only realistic way that we're going to solve this and send it into reverse is for a social society. That means a socialist plan of production. I stand for not just socialism of Britain, I stand for a socialist United States of Europe. And eventually we do need a socialist world. That means plan the needs of society and plan for people's needs and not for profits. While we have a system that's based on profits, while we have a system where people will get rich on the back of pollution, that will always pose a severe threat to mankind. And we see that it may be almost too late to reverse the climate change that we're in now. And therefore, the clock is ticking. And therefore, I believe only a social solution. And it's not utopia because of the capitalism. I believe that we will not be able to change this. And that's why my view is that socialism isn't utopian. I believe it's the only practical way that we can change society and save the planet.
I think it always shocks me when you see the occasional person on the telly denying climate change, because I think the evidence is so clear and so scientifically grounded that it's almost a waste of time talking about whether it's happening. We really need to get on with tackling it. Sadly, an academic report recently showed that mainstream media coverage in the UK of this issue has decreased rapidly in the last few years. And I think that tells me something quite worrying, in that people almost feel, we've heard about that, we want to hear about something else now. But I also accept the premise of the question that this is an extreme extremely serious threat. I think there's two things here. First is about changing attitudes and making it easier for people to change their attitudes and the way they live their lives. I don't own a car. It's through choice. Sometimes in January when it's raining and I'm at the bus stop, I worry about that choice, but it's through choice. I cycle and I use public transport. One of the reasons for that is I became sick of going to meetings where people would bang on about the environment. It's really important, we must do something, and then jump in cars and go a couple of miles, not thinking I'm actually potentially adding to a problem here. So I make that sort of personal commitment. I'm also a vegetarian for the same reason, not because of necessarily worrying about animals, but worrying about the carbon gases produced in food production, which is major. In terms of party policy, if you look in the Lib Dem manifesto, one of the things we've said is, as well as opposing a new runway at Heathrow, which seems to be on the cards in some quarters, we will oppose any net increase in airport runways anywhere in the UK. So we appreciate that air travel is a major contributor to climate change, and it's important that we don't accept the premise that we must increase airports all the time. It's really important to have more air travel. We also talk about the need for more sustainable energy generation. I personally, this is not Lib Dem policy, this is a personal thing, I have personally also signed a pledge against fracking, because I think that is also, in the environmental sector, that is something that also needs to be opposed.
Lisa.
This is one I could talk about all night, obviously, so I'll try and boil it down to a few sound bites.
I deliberately didn't give Lisa fair. I thought it's a bit too stereotypical.
But really glad to get asked this question because it hasn't come up elsewhere for me in any major way. Well, let's see, where do we start? Number one, stop using fossil fuels. So the Green Party wants to decommission all coal-fired power plants within 5 years. We want to decommission all nuclear in the UK within 10 years. We want to pour a load of money into the wealth of renewable opportunities that we have in the UK. And that doesn't just mean on an engineering level, by the way, because our pledge of creating 1 million green jobs, climate jobs in the UK goes right across every sector of the economy. But most obviously, investment in solar, wave and wind power to be agreed with local communities. We were the pioneer party when it came to any kind of anti-fracking, which I don't think anybody else on the panel actually opposes as an outright position. What else can I say? Disincentivising individual car use by providing excellent public transport systems, car sharing where use of vehicles is essential, using rail and freight rather than trucks and wagons on the road, which are a real blot on the landscape. Just at every level, we want to, from the personal right up to the national, make sure that everything we do in this country is sustainable and restorable. And I would say also that I think we're the only party who's got commitments to reforestation of the UK, looking after our green spaces, looking after our woodland and the green lungs of the country, which is very, very important, particularly in the south of Bootle Constituency. Major problem with pollution, a lot of road building has gone on, and really the kind of measures that have been taken to try and offset that are kind of limp and inadequate for the people who have to live there and the children who attend primary schools in that area. Please come and ask me more about this because I don't want to hog the entire panel about this, but those are just some of our big ones. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa.
I think most of our damage got done in Britain during the Industrial Revolution and things like that. We're only just starting to deal with the problems of that. Whereas you've got India, Pakistan and China who are all trying to catch up to our way of living. And obviously they're the major contributors at the moment. So our government needs to go to China and India and have international
I think people have covered the points I'd made, but I think there are issues, and I think the last point is very important, because I think for us in this country, in that post-industrial, post-modern society, yes, we have had our development, yes, we are a very wealthy country, we continue, notwithstanding our study, to become, continue with our wealth. And I think we have to have an eye to those countries which haven't developed, and we have to be very careful that we haven't pulled the ladder from those people. So we're now proselytising and pushing the whole issue about climate change and what they should do and what we should do. The issue for me is important. Yes, you do have to have international agreements, and I know John Prescott's been really pushing on that one. Did in the last government, and is going to be an ambassador for the next Labour government if we do win on that particular issue. But of course, there got to be those national issues that we have to deal with, and I think we have to have more climate-friendly policies now. Whether that's electrification, whether that be in relation to cycling, buses, car sharing, that's been referred to, a whole range of those practical, mechanistic processes. I think there has to be a push towards a much more green-led job, development of sort of green-led jobs in that regard. They've got to be pushing at that level, on a national level, and at a regional level, and a sub-regional, a city regional level. We've got to push on with that, and that is why part of the local enterprise partnership in the city region cabinet, which I'm a member, have got one of our priorities is about green-led growth. You know, for example, they've been talking about the refit, the retrofit of 5 million homes in relation to insulation. So those practical movements at a national, regional, and city regional level, but also the stuff that we have to do at an international level, without the hectoring, without the finger wagging, without the telling other people how they should run their countries. That's important that we have that international dimension as well.
Okay, we'll have another question, more of a sort of constitutional nature, and then again we'll have another opportunity for questions within the panel and from the floor. This next question, where Paul will take the lead, I think it's been asked in every single one of the debates so far, and I'm not entirely sure whether it's been answered at any of the debates so far. But the question is, nobody realistically expects an outright winner in this election. Which parties would you see yourself going into coalition with, or within some post-election agreement?
Well, it's sad to say, as a politics academic, I've had to read a lot of commentators on the subject of what happens if we can't get a coalition agreement. Will there be another election? What does the Constitution say? And my synthesis of all that reading is nobody really knows. You know, so you can pick your expert on this, quite frankly. Certainly what our party has said is that we would feel that it would be more legitimate to talk first to the party that had won the most seats. Okay, so there's a legitimacy angle there. That doesn't mean to say that we won't end up with a government that is a combination of parties who don't include that party, but I think there is an issue there about governments being legitimate, and that does mean dealing with the one that is perceived to have won before dealing with the others. Certainly, Nick Clegg has ruled a couple out. He's ruled out UKIP, and he's ruled out the DUP in Northern Ireland as well. But to be honest with you, I'm sick and tired of all the politicians, including the ones in my own party, banging on about who they will and won't do a deal with. Nobody knows how these dice are going to fall. The important thing is for each party to go back to its values and look at what its main points in its manifesto are, and then to negotiate based on those, not based on instant dislike or what so-and-so might have said to so-and-so a couple of weeks ago, because I've got to tell you, nobody knows what's going to come out of this election. The only thing I will say is I think last time there was a lot of rubbish, quite frankly, about we've got to get this coalition sorted really quickly because otherwise the markets will go into free fall. Well, you know, the markets in other countries don't go into free fall when they take a little bit longer. And I think it would be much better, whichever parties are involved this time, if the actual coalition-making process, if there is a coalition, is done at a slightly slower pace than that pace which I felt was unnecessarily speedy last time. Of course, I may end up having a say in this because the Liberal Democrats, being democratic, if an agreement is looking on the cards, we will have a special conference at which delegates from local parties will go and vote, and I am one of those people that has a vote at that special conference if it's called.
Can I just say before Lisa addresses this that UKIP have been mentioned once or twice, and can I just say for the sake of order that Paul, not only UKIP candidate, was invited to be here tonight, and he was not able to be here because he's on BBC Radio 4's Any Questions, which obviously was a far more attractive option than Friday night attendance. So I just thought I'd make that clear that all the local candidates were invited tonight. Sorry, Lisa.
Yes, yet another very important media engagement. I can't be the only person in this room who really does not want to see Nick Clegg doing an impression of a human cigarette paper on May the 8th. I think Clegg's betrayal of his core vote of students who thought that he was going to make their lives immeasurably better will never forget that one. And unluckily for Clegg and for the Lib Dems, they're going to grow older, they're going to have kids themselves, and they're not going to forget that one with £44,000 on average of student debt hanging around their necks. So yeah, let's hope we don't see that happening. Very unseemly business. I can tell you for a fact that the Green Party has a red line, which is that we will not enter into any coalition with a party which supports austerity measures. That's our bottom line. Okay, so what that would mean in practice is that if we gain sufficient MPs to be invited into any kind of arrangement with one of the majority winning parties, that we would do that on a confidence and supply basis, but Conservatives and UKIP have been completely ruled out of the equation. Anybody's membership of the Green Party would be revoked if an individual tried to work with somebody from those governments, okay? And let's not even get into DUP. That's why I left Northern Ireland, to get away from people like that. So yeah, case by case, no formal coalition, but as you must know from seeing the political coverage over the past few weeks, we do have an alliance with the SNP and Plaid Cymru in Wales, because we have broadly similar agendas when it comes to combating austerity and getting this country out of poverty and out of this lie once and for all.
We'll come to this end, and then by coincidence, sitting next to each other, we've got a view from the two main parties.
Just make a point, you've been going on like how democratic your party is, yet they would have their membership revoked if they considered discussing anything with Conservatives, regardless of what that policy was. I don't think that's democratic, but I think we can safely rule out SNP for a start. The Lib Dems, I think we've actually worked quite well with. I think it's a good, healthy balance of what the Conservatives have wanted to achieve in regards to the economy growing and what the Liberal Democrats have wanted to achieve in, you know, the environment and things like that. I think that's all we can say right now. Who knows what's going to happen on May the 8th? I certainly I'm not making the decision, so.
Somebody, I think Lisa mentioned before about the Labour Party and the Tories and Grand Coalition. I don't think it's very much grand about their coalition in that regard. The other thing is that in terms of, I'm always suspicious. Maybe I'm getting a bit, sceptical, cynical, call it what you want. But I'm always sceptical of the sort of messianic approach to politics, frankly. And I think the less messianic approach to politics, I suppose, was the Liberal Democrats at the last election, where everybody thought this particular party, it could be another party party, to be fair, but I'm not really trying to insult anyone, but that messianic approach, which is, we've got a new party on the block, and that's going to be different, and that's going to change everything. It doesn't work like that. Politics doesn't work like that. People accuse politicians of being grubby sometimes. Well, sometimes it does get a little bit grubby. Sometimes it does get a little bit dirty. That, to some extent, is the nature of politics. That, to some extent, is the nature of life. It's not to say it's right or wrong, but that's sometimes what happens in that world out there. In relation to the sort of constitutional point, there was a convention, it's called the Salisbury Convention. The Salisbury Convention was set up in the century before last, the back end of the century before last, which effectively said, what you do, as we were getting at the expansion of universal suffrage, what it effectively said, you're now going to have to go out to those people and tell them what your proposals are. What is your manifesto? You go out to them and you say, this is our manifesto, and we're going to do our utmost to try to put that into effect. And what happened with the last coalition, that convention was torn up. That convention was torn up because we had, for example, the Conservatives saying, we're not going to have a top-down reorganisation of the NHS. And what did it go and do? Major top-down reorganisation of the NHS that cost billions of pounds. We had the situation where the Liberal Democrats had a major policy. It was perhaps their most substantial policies. The one they pushed most was the tuition fees, and that got sort of chucked out as well. So I only use those two examples. I'm not trying to be self-righteous on this. I'm sure I'll get reminded of things that the Labour Party's done. But in terms of this messianic approach to politics, it doesn't happen. Specifically, who would you do deals with? I was at a do about 6 weeks ago that Dennis Skinner, the Beast of Bolsover, was at, and it was fantastic. And he'd been here since, he's been a member of Parliament since 1970, and he's been there with all sorts of things that have been happening. Whether it was the 1974, the two elections in 74, then 76 when Wilson went, and then 78, 79 when Callum was doing deals. And he said, I'm not having coalition. In no way will I have a coalition. But there's nothing wrong with a deal. Now, there's nothing wrong with a good deal. And the point at the end of the day depends on what the deal is for. So, for me, it's the progressive approach to this is that if the Labour Party has got policies and it wants to get those particular policies through, it's not a question of doing deals or not doing deals, it's a question of saying, there are policies, we're going to be standing up and be counted on those policies. If you want to support them, support them. If the Greens want to support them, support them. If they don't want to, don't. Same with the Liberal Democrats. There are policies, that's the manifesto we put forward, and we don't want, we want to stick to that Salisbury Convention approach. There are policies, you support them or you don't support them. And it's not a question we don't care, but we'd rather you did, because that's going to be in the best interest of the country.
I'll put on Peter Glover on this one, and then we'll have questions from the floor.
It's going to be very interesting the next period, because if you look at the two major parties, they're outdoing each other in their hatred of the Scottish National Party, and that seems to be one of the determining factors in what the coalition is going to look like in the next Parliament. And you would appear, I mean, according to Cameron, and also I think Farage has started this off with his dismissal of people north of Havens of War, which actually includes a large part of England as well. Not too good on geography, Mr Farage, but also that's been echoed by David Cameron, who really is now decided that the Conservatives are the party in England. And despite his desire to save the Union, precisely by using that nationalist card to win votes, he could end up destroying the Union itself. So, and by the way, for Miliband, he's jumping to the same tune as David Cameron, and they are playing very, very dangerous games. And it could very well be, if you were a Scot and your party held every seat in Scotland, and that, by the way, is by no means ruled out, I think another referendum is on the agenda. And so the short-termism of British politics it's absolutely incredible. Also, I think party political leaders tend to be extroverts. If you look at Cameron, I make decisions. If you look at Miliband, hell yes, I make decisions. Quick decisions are bad decisions, and they're making decisions on the hoof that are going to have profound consequences for the United Kingdom. And by the way, I do support Scottish independence. And just a couple of other points. In terms of socialists will never, ever enter into a coalition with any capitalist party. That doesn't mean I dislike any of the people on the panel. It means that we cannot accept the laws of the market. If you're in Parliament, Parliament makes laws, but it can't change the laws outside the door. It can't change the laws of supply and demand. That can only be done by a socialist transformation society, by the nationalisation of the top 150 companies and the banks and the financial industry. So really, irrespective of what deals are done, we will still have capitalism and we will still have the laws of capitalism, no matter who gets in. Nevertheless, I do warn people that the short-termism of the big parties are going to lead to quite a substantial earthquake in the next few months or even few weeks.
Okay, we'll give the opportunity for people to ask questions. I just want to throw something into the mix, not to answer now, when we come back to the panel. First time I ever voted when I was just 18 was February 1974 when we had a general election. The second time I ever voted was in October 1974, which was 8 months later when we were not in a too dissimilar a situation. So you might want to think about whether how it would work out. Possibly we'll be back very shortly after this one. But I'll just leave that one in the mix for now. We'll just see if there's any more questions from the floor. On the two issues we've had, climate change and parties working together. Any comments or questions? Good, so we're going to have another election in 10 months' time. Anybody want to comment? Any views?
No, I don't think there will be. Not that I don't hope there will be, but I'm concerned about it. But I don't think there will be an election in the next 12 months, because I think what we've seen, we've had majority governments, we've had minority governments, we've had coalitions, and in British history in one form or another, we've got a coalition government now, and I think it's effectively trying to get on and do something with the tools that we've actually got. And I don't, if everybody's concerned that, well, we're just going to have the same thing again in 12 months' time, what's the point of that? Just let's get on with this election. Let's see what comes out of it. It happens in other countries. They don't fall apart. They don't have to have. It's not. We're not Italy that had elections every 12 months. Most European countries, and certainly the bigger ones, get on and do the business without there having to be elections every 6 or 12 months.
No, I don't think there will be. One of the reasons for that is the Fixed Term Parliaments Act 2011 has actually made it much more difficult for a Prime Minister to suddenly say, oh, let's have an election. Okay, so it is actually much harder now for there to be a quickly called election. That's not to say it's impossible. There are provisions in the Act for that to happen, but it's harder. And actually, fixed-term parliaments was something pretty much supported across the political spectrum in order to remove the power of one political individual to choose an election at the time of their own suiting. I actually think Peter's right. I think politicians will grow up and work together because they'll be faced with a situation where it's in their interest. There's a lot of really big issues to be sorted out. And the public actually want them to. You know, if you go out and ask people on the street, the one thing I can guarantee they'll say is that they don't like politicians squabbling. They want politicians to work together more. Now, if that's genuinely the opinion of people on the street, it's genuinely in the interest of politicians in Parliament to do that. So, although I wouldn't say it's impossible, my view is that we're highly unlikely to have another election like that.
I think there's a very strong likelihood that there's going to be another election very quickly because there's two factors. One is, I mentioned before, the constitutional crisis that could very well ensue, and I think also the growing divide between Scotland and between England, not necessarily only working people, but the political elite, and people now really start to feel very threatened and worried in Scotland due to the bang of the nationalist drum. So I think that will play significantly. The second factor will be And there are these billions of pounds worth of cuts that are still due to be forced upon the vast majority of people who just can't afford to have any more cuts. And therefore, we are likely to see something along the line of the poll tax. Well, people will be taken to the streets. And what happens on the streets, what happens in ordinary people's lives, will significantly affect what happens in Parliament. It's not a bubble. It's not, I know people like to talk about grown-up politics, but grown-up politics means what happens if you get your benefits sanctioned and people can't take any more. They've already reached the point that they're cut to the bone and now they're cutting into the bone. And I believe that, we can't really foresee what will happen, but all the ingredients are for a very, very turbulent next 12 months.
Any other questions from the floor? One here and one here. One question here as well.
I just wanted to ask about, on the topic earlier, pluralism, as well as the idea of coalitions. Do any of you feel that as there are more parties with get more proportionate votes, coalitions are far more likely to be needed in the near future? And in that case, should we, obviously I think coalitions are something that we should be talking about, but should we change things to accommodate for that as a likely possibility for the future? For example, as a Lib Dem voter in the last election, mostly for tuitions and tuition fees and tridents, I feel that had there been something in place where I would have known how things might have turned out if that coalition was a likely possibility, I might have gone with a different vote.
I think Lisa wants to go first and then...
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. There's kind of two parts to that. So I'll briefly kind of give you an outline of why the Green Party is against formal coalitions. Can you imagine, for example, if we got like a healthy number of seats, like maybe up towards double figures or possibly beyond, which would be paradise for us, having kind of got to that stage so quickly. And then a coalition cabinet is being formed, and somebody said to, say, Caroline Lucas, right, Caroline, would you like to be Minister for the Environment? Okay, let's say it's, a Labour-led coalition, right? She's offered that ministry. She then has to go about, basically being a kind of lapdog and kind of announcing, kind of polluting and, fossil fuel measures. That's horrendous. That's just a diabolical situation. She just turns into a kind of messenger of doom then. That's why we're against coalitions with anybody who practices, austerity politics or kind of goes profoundly against our beliefs, and that's why we would work rather on a kind of confidence and supply, kind of case-by-case kind of basis. On your second point about how you were duped about the Lib Dem's tuition fee promises, you and many millions of others, by the way, I think there should be legislation in place where there is a public record kept of election promises, and we bring in very stiff recall laws for parties and politicians who refuse to enact the vast majority of their pledges. Certainly they should have to rank the priority of their pledges, because that would have been number one for the Lib Dems in anybody's book. So yeah, we should actually be able to take legal action against parties and politicians who break their promises so horrendously to the people. You were duped, your vote was stolen from you, effectively. And many other people are in the same boat. So yeah, that's what we want to bring in.
Paul, and then we'll have this question here, and then anyone else on the panel on this one and the other question.
So the question was, do we think that coalitions are more likely with pluralism? Well, yeah, that's what the maths tells us, although it doesn't always have to be a formal coalition. It could be some sort of looser agreement. I'm not wild about these confidence and supply agreements. Confidence and supply agreement is basically when one party says, okay, we won't vote down your budget. Okay, so you have no say in the drawing up of the budget, but you've already agreed that you won't vote down the budget. So I think, in those situations, it's actually a worse deal for the party that's making that arrangement. How do I think we could have different arrangements to deal with increasing coalitions? I think the concept of collective responsibility could say, look, there was a disagreement, these were the points made, this is how the vote went, and there you are. So you're not actually always saying, oh yes, we all agreed with it and everything was happy, happy, happy. You're actually giving the groundwork for how that decision was worked out. I also think if we accept that coalitions are a major fact of life in future, it's possible to write party manifestos in a different way. I mean, if everybody accepts that coalitions are likely, it's possible to write manifestos in a way which says, these are what we would want to do if we had a government on our own. We accept that might not happen. Therefore, these are the things that actually are the non-negotiables. Now, what's happened in the election is parties are publicising their non-negotiables, but they're doing them sort of now on a day-by-day basis rather than putting them in full print. I have to say, at the 2010 election, the actual main Liberal Democrat priorities were on the front page of our manifesto, and despite the various bits of coverage, tuition fees actually wasn't one of them. I'm not saying we hadn't said something on tuition fees, I'm saying it wasn't one of the main 5 pledges on the front of the manifesto. Those main 5 pledges have been delivered.
Okay, so we have this question here and then views from the panel on the...
Do you think it's best for Britain to stay in the European Union? Because in 1972 we joined what was called the Common Market. And now 40 years on, the European situation has expanded to the point of being ridiculous, where we're ruled by Brussels. And do you think it's best to stay in, or if the Conservatives stay in government, they will have a referendum on it in maybe 2 years' time?
Yeah, no, we couldn't actually discuss this all night. But very brief comments from the panel on this, okay, and then we'll go into our third question. Yeah, sorry, go. Sweep from right to left, so to speak.
We absolutely have been getting a raw deal from Europe. Nobody can tell that. I think, okay, we do get some investments into, more social things, and, they're brilliant. However, we do have a problem with the, the movement of people into this country, which I think Cameron is really dealing with very well, saying, okay, you come to this country and work. As many as need to come in and do it, but if you're just coming for benefits, that's not going to happen. You've got to work for 4 years until you can claim benefits in this country, which I think is a really brilliant idea. We do need a referendum. I don't think it's up to politicians to decide the future of our country. It's down to each and every one of us. We've all got our own opinions about whether it's good or bad, maybe a little bit in between. So I think that's the way forward on that.
Unequivocally, we should stay in Europe. 50% of our trade is with Europe, about 25% is with North America. So 75% of our trade is with two economic blocks. Unequivocally, we should stay in Europe. We are Europeans. We might like to think we're Europeans, but we are European. I'm a European. I've been brought up in a generation of being taught about my place in Europe. And there's a danger with, I think, the Conservatives in the UK, is that it gets xenophobic. We as a nation seem to be able to talk about going all over the world. We had an empire. We were quite happy to go and occupy everybody else's country for hundreds of years. And as soon as we get some people coming to our country, we actually don't like it. Do you remember the sterling area? That was a single currency, hundreds of millions of people in that. And it's always for us, it's a single currency if it's our single currency, and if somebody else's single currency, we don't like it. So I think we've got to stay within Europe. It's our best hope for the future, it's our best hope for peace, and it's the best hope for those countries which are still poor, like the Albanians and the Romanians, to become wealthier, for us to continue to trade with them. And yes, there may well be at this particular moment in time, the next 4 or 5 years, 10 years, that tension. But I think we're all Europeans, and I think in 50 or 20 years' time, when some people in this room might be dead, some of us are well retired, we'll be in a completely different situation, and we'll thank God that we didn't come out of Europe.
For different reasons, I'm not like UKIP, but I'm totally opposed whatsoever, but quite the contrary. The reason I oppose the EU, I'll give you one very good reason: Greece. If you see what the EU and the Troika has imposed upon Greece, which is not just endless austerity, it's downright cruelty. Money is lent to Greece, and then within a few days, the same money is being returned to the pockets of bankers in Germany. And it's an absolute disgrace how the EU can torture a country like that. They're not doing it any favours at all. Therefore, if that's what the EU will do to a country like Greece, why that institution is not fit for purpose. If it's a pro-European institution, it should be helping those who are least advantaged, like the Greeks. They were quick enough to lend them money, and now they're pulling the rug from under them. And therefore, I think the only alternative really is, I'm not saying little England, we need a united Europe, but it can't be united on the basis of banks. It can't be united on the basis of big business. It has to be united on the basis of equality and socialism.
Should we stay in the European Union? Absolutely yes. There are huge benefits derived for this country from being in the European Union, and I think it is a distraction that politicians like to use sometimes to keep raising this issue. I actually remember the referendum. I was at school at the time in 1975 about what was then the common market. So, you know, I'm aware of how this organisation has changed and developed and expanded. But if I look at where I work, at Edge Hill, the sort of corridor my office is on, 2 doors down there's someone from Romania, a couple of doors down further someone from Luxembourg, just across the other side of the stairwell someone from Germany. We are enriched by sharing our working lives with these people. They bring things to the students that would not be there otherwise, and it will be a crying shame if Britain loses its influence in the EU. I do worry we are losing influence, because I think every time this issue comes up of, yeah, we're going to have a referendum tomorrow, we might leave, we lose a bit more influence. But another point to argue for the EU, some of the issues that have been raised this evening, like climate change, climate change doesn't sort of stop at the UK borders. These are international issues, and it's by working with our EU partners and through the EU that we can begin to tackle some of these environmental issues. So should we stay in? Absolutely.
I'll have Lise from this, and then she hold the mic, because Lise will have the first dibs on the fifth question, but deal with this one first.
I think I'm kind of child of the sort of Maastricht Treaty era. I was all born when I was in sort of form school kind of age, and we were very much sold, you know, the benefits of being part of Europe and all the amazing opportunities that would bring. And how the dream has soured now that I'm 40 years old, it looks very, very different in a lot of ways. Things that I have really appreciated about Europe include freedom of movement. I've spent several years of my career working as a teacher in various different European schools, and also the opportunity to go out and meet all kinds of different people and have exchanges with people that would not be possible if it involved having to get a visa and do, you know, kind of complex bureaucratic things every time that occurred. I think one of the worst things that has gone on in Europe is the euro. I think it's a dreadful system. I worked in Greece for over a year, and that was in the year 2010, and you can see the devastation that wreaked on ordinary people, whilst the parents of some of the children I was teaching at a private school were buying tarpaulins to hide their swimming pools from the taxman in his helicopter. So that was the kind of gap between rich and poor that was going on there, and that was the havoc that the euro wreaked on that situation. The Green Party wants to give, this is a little known fact about the Green Party, one that doesn't come up that much actually, we want to give everybody in the UK a referendum, in-out referendum on Europe. So Labour won't give you that, Lib Dems won't give you that. It's been a policy of ours for several years now, and the reason why we have that policy is because it's democratic. It's democratic to ask the people of the UK what they want to do. The Green Party would be opposed to leaving Europe, and we would, during the referendum campaign vigorously to stay in, but on the basis of augmenting the terms of us being in Europe, we would never accept being in the euro currency system. But yeah, I mean, we think it's your right as citizens of the UK to have a vote on this and put this kind of Farage-led issue to bed once and for all, and work to build a better Europe, which we cannot do if we get the big saw out and try and kind of cut a line in the English Channel and drift off by ourselves somewhere. So yeah, I mean, remarkably, I actually agree with something that Paula said tonight, which was that we cannot make any legislation about climate change unless we're part of a Europe-wide consortium on that. A lot of really dodgy things happening with the common agricultural policy and other kinds of fisheries measures and that kind of thing in Europe, but those can only be amended and only campaigned against if we remain in the EU and we sort it out. And I would say that the best way to stop people from far-flung corners of Europe coming here and working for slave money is to campaign to have a Europe-wide living wage. This is a really big green policy. So the equivalent of £10 per hour right across, £10 per hour buying power in every country in Europe. So that's like number one green reason for staying in Europe.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. We've come to our fifth question, which I'll ask. It is actually almost 9 o'clock. How quickly time goes when you're having fun. But we will do this question so that every candidate will have had the chance to speak first and last on each topic. So if you do need to go, because it's almost 9, we do apologise, and hopefully people will be able to stay around to chat afterwards. But the final question, and Lisa will take the first on this, is what are the greatest security threats facing us in 2015? Are the billions spent on renewing Trident money well spent?
Thanks, Steve. So you will get totally bored of the sound of my voice. I'll do this one quickly. You're probably expecting me to say something like ISIS. In terms of the fact that Muslim youth in the UK feel so disenfranchised from this country that they're trying to find ways to break into Syria and go on secret flights via Turkey and that kind of thing, that fills me with such desolation that we have failed those young people, that they've become radicalised in that way, and they feel there's nothing for them in this country and nothing about British society that they want to lend their passion and their energy to, that they feel they want to go and do that. That is a desperate situation. We need to be looking at that. In some ways we can't blame them because of the foreign wars and the Islamophobia that has been spread in this country due to our again, kind of ties to the American colonial program in the Middle East. What I think is the greatest security threat facing the UK is actually surveillance, particularly online surveillance of citizens. So most people in this room will probably have some sort of connection to the digital world, some kind of credit card, some kind of use of plastic. You're being monitored and tracked, your data is being shared by all kinds of people, and not necessarily to friendly ends. It's not just to send you a wee, bank holiday shopping voucher or something like that. There are several members of the Green Party, long-standing members of the Green Party, including MEPs, who've been tracked by the British police for over 10 years now, all because they went to something like an anti-fracking protest, all because they were waving a placard about the NHS cuts that they objected to. That's an attack on freedom of speech. That is really not a mark of a civilised society. And I can tell you, having lived under martial law in Northern Ireland, you do not want to be seeing that whenever things really hit the fan with austerity, if that's what comes to pass. Trident, money well spent? No. £100 billion, approximately £3 billion a year just to run it. Think of the hospitals, schools, and services for the poor that we can benefit with that cash. Just no. Really simple answer.
Thank you. Jane Marston.
Trident is absolutely money well spent, because then hospitals won't be there if we get nuked by Russia at the end of the day. We can all say Cold War's over and things like that, but we've got to remember that there are planes flying over the south of England right now from Russia and being deterred by our own, our own air force. I think we need to take that on board and not get complacent with the way the world is. Of course, there's terrorists and there's homegrown terrorists, and that, we obviously need surveillance and to keep an eye on them. But we just can't be complacent with any kind of dangers to our country.
Thank you. Lisa talked about being tracked. I think they clearly haven't got anything better to do than tracking me, basically. It must be a pretty boring existence that they have. I'm hardly worth tracking myself, frankly. In terms of the threats, I think there are lots of threats. I mean, there are threats there, as the old Donald Rumsfeld, there are threats there that I don't know exist, most probably, or threats on the way that I don't know. But yes, we do have threats, whether it's from the Russians, whether it's from ISIS, whether it's from the Islamicists, whether it's from some surveillance. There are lots of threats out there. Whether they come to fruition is a different kettle of fish. But there are lots of threats out there. And the very nature sometimes of the beast is you don't know where it's going to come from next. And I'm not being paranoid about that. We don't know. Who would have thought, I don't know, 10 years ago, we would have had all the tensions we've got now with the Soviet Union, for example. Who would have even believed the 15 years ago, the tensions we've got in relation to the sort of Islamicist threat and where it comes. So I think there are lots of things out there that are potentially threatening, maybe threatening. We may or may not know about them. As regards to Trident, do I support that? Do I think it's well spent? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I don't support Trident with alacrity, but I think it's the environment that we're in. It's for me about that multilateral approach to these sorts of things. You could take a principled decision, which is effectively saying, well, we don't care. As a matter of principle, we're going to give Trident up, and it will save us £100 billion. I completely accept that. There's another version of that, which is we have nuclear weapons, other states have nuclear weapons, and the way to proceed with that is a multilateral approach. I don't think that's a dishonourable way. I don't necessarily think it's the wrong way. I think people have different views about it. But I have to say, I don't do it with alacrity. It's not something that I sort of really find particularly comfortable. That's the honesty of it. If I'm being completely honest, I find it very, very uncomfortable. But I think it's the multilateral approach to dealing with the issue.
I think we live in probably the most dangerous times in the last, since the Second World War, quite clearly. I was in Kiev recently, and I was there, and I saw the barricades, and I saw troops going off to war at the heart of Europe, and I saw wounded people coming into the city of Kiev, and I've seen refugees in their hundreds of thousands across Ukraine. Who would have thought that? Who would have thought that a few years ago? Now, by the way, let me say unequivocally that I think you should scrap Trident. The idea you can have nuclear missiles with us and believe people are on food banks is an obscenity. And I think that's absolutely for me, there is no argument about that. But if you look across the world, it's not just, within Europe. If you look, there's a four-cornered fight in the South China Sea. You've got China built on a man-made island in the Spratly Islands, and you've got Japan, China in an arms race with Vietnam and Taiwan. I think maybe another power as well. And if you look at Saudi Arabia has invaded Yemen. Yemen's got 40 million people live in Yemen. It's not like an underpopulated country. And the Saudi regime itself is a crazy dictatorship. It's probably the most complete dictatorship outside of North Korea on the planet. By the way, we are supporting that dictatorship. We have good relations with people who execute 100 people a year. That is, the fact that we've supported the Saudi dictatorship means we are again presiding over this incredibly unstable situation. There's obviously more conflicts and stuff like that we could talk about. But again, it boils down to these conflicts will come home to roost unless we change root and branch the nature of society. And it might be an idealistic position, I'll come back to it again, but it's the only position because people will desperately flee poverty, they'll desperately flee war. If I lived in Iraq, I would
open to anywhere. Or if I lived in Libya, I'm for anywhere but Libya. If I lived in North Africa, for anywhere, almost everywhere, I'd want to come and escape it because it's a living hell for a huge swathe of Middle East and North Africa. And therefore, we have to transform those countries. Capitalism only really supports 20% of the population of the world. It's able to just about manage, in its history of 400 years, just about manage to make sure Western Europe and North America, people are like kind of above starvation level, apart from the million people with food banks. But that's it, that's its limit. And now we see wars raging right around those areas, and therefore, I think, again, I know Peter said this to not like a scratch record, but it is socialism. I think that's the only thing. I could talk a long time about this, but I won't. But socialism, you know, I think we need to discuss it more. You can speak to me later about it. Okay.
Okay, so the question was about the greatest security threats, and then a linked question about Trident. We all had a laugh, didn't we, when the Sony Corporation's systems were hacked into, and we all managed to read about what the executives were saying about these highly paid actors. But for me, that's an example of what I believe the most serious security threat is, and it's the cyber threat. Simply by not having proper protection on our cyber systems means we would lay ourselves open to everything stopping. Just about everything is run by computers in one way or another, isn't it? So the threat to our cyber systems is I think, the most serious threat that this country faces. And any sort of evil regime that wanted to attack us that way would be able to bring the country to its knees very, very quickly if they managed to do so. And I think evidence of concern about this is shown by the increase in the number of university courses actually specialising in internet security, which is a growth area at the moment. Also, terrorism, acts of terrorism within the country are, I think, a clear threat, and Lisa's right to point to the need to deal with the causes of that. You know, if you don't deal with the causes, you can't protect yourselves. Do I think the money, do I think it's worth spending money on renewing Trident? No, I don't, and neither does General Sir Richard Dannat, who used to be the Chief of the General Staff. I mean, it's interesting to me that very senior military people are beginning to say it's a waste of money, don't renew it. I am a member of CND. I'm also a member of something called Lib Dems Against Trident. And I noticed today that CND are circulating their latest person being quoted standing up against Trident. It's Michael Portillo. Okay, people from all sorts of backgrounds are beginning to recognise that this weapon is not going to be an effective part of our defence. I personally wouldn't want it even if it cost nothing. But the fact that it costs all this money, and the fact that there are so many other things we could spend that money on, I think is an additional argument to say it shouldn't be renewed. I'm going to be honest with you. What I've just said is my personal view. It is not completely Lib Dem policy. Our policy is in the manifesto. We have come up with a policy which reduces but doesn't completely eliminate. I would want to see in the next Parliament parties working together to abandon any prospect of renewing Trident.
Okay, so it's long past 9, and I did want to have the 5 questions with the 5 candidates, each having the opportunity to lead and to finish. I know 1 or 2 people did have other issues we wanted to talk about, so I do apologise. Just as well, if you're nice. Just a show of hands, have you found this evening useful, worthwhile? Are you more likely or less likely to vote for any particular party because of... that's a tougher one, isn't it? Okay, 1 or 2 yeses. We just want to close, and like we at the start, we had 1 minute for each candidate, and because we're in a church environment, I think this is an issue that a lot of people associated with churches are concerned about. So 1 final closing question, and literally 1 or 2 minutes each, if you have a view. Do religion and politics mix? Should the church be politically engaged or stay at home and do its knitting? Which somebody did say recently. What role do faith communities have in creating a good society? So we'll go down from right to left again, very briefly, just 1 or 2 minutes. A closing comment.
I think it's very important that the church does have a dialogue with politics. Whether they make it public or private, I'm not sure whether that's so useful. Obviously, the church is, you know, a vital part of our community, and they're seeing what people are needs and what their problems are a lot more than a politician can ever see. So, yeah, I think there should always be an open dialogue with the church.
Thank you. Peter.
The question is, do religion and politics mix? They certainly do, and sometimes it can be a very volatile mix. And in a democracy, I think that's absolutely right. So yes, they do mix, and it's quite right that they should mix. Should the church be politically engaged or stay at home and do its knitting? Well, the answer to the first question answers the second question. No, they shouldn't stay at home and do their knitting. They are part of our community. The church is part of our community. Faith communities are part of our community. They're a faith community. And therefore, yes, they should be perfectly entitled to express their views in whatever way they feel appropriate. And what role do faith communities have in creating a good society? I think they have an enormous place in society. I don't think that you have to be religious to accept that. I believe that just as a matter of fact, faith communities, people who are involved in faith communities, are engaged in an awful lot of fantastic work. And I think that lots of the stuff that we do in society wouldn't get done if we didn't have faith communities, didn't have voluntary communities, the voluntary sector becoming involved in that. So yes, you know, more power to the ability for faith communities as part of a democratic society to engage. Yes, so an absolutely definite yes to that.
Thank you. Good.
Controversially, Jesus was a communist. And I think if you look at the Bible, I want to look at two parts of the Bible actually. Approach this from a different angle. The Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount, if you look at Luke, it's blessed are the poor. You look at John, it's blessed are the poor in spirit, which is a cop-out. And I think Luke is the more faithful. I think Luke describes the real kind of Christian community who were, look at these Roman oppressors, you know, look at these banksters that we've got today, let's get rid of them. One of the other interesting parts of our life is the Acts of the Apostles. Read the Acts of the Apostles. The Acts of the Apostles, quite clearly, God is on the side of communism. Because what happens to the treasurer? God strikes him down dead. The guy who steals the funds from the communist society, which was the early part of the church. And I think if you look at any of the Christian scholars, they do point towards what the message, and mind you, the gospel is, which is, give away your worldly goods, is an end to inequality. And that really does mean socialism. So therefore, I can confidently say, if Jesus is here today, he can vote for Tusk.
On that note, Paul.
I can absolutely attest that's the first time I've actually heard that. Okay, well, John Wesley said there's no holiness without social holiness. And I think what he was saying with that is, it's all very well, thinking about the religion, but actually you've got to roll your sleeves up and do things as well. And that's why I think it's important that not just faith communities, but people of faith actually do engage in community organisations, do engage in making their views heard politically, do get involved in politics. All parties actually have ministers who stand as candidates in them. I know we certainly have, and we welcome that because it brings, a fantastic extra perspective. So yes, I think both faith communities and people of faith, separately, should be involved in politics because politics is about values. Yeah. Now we clearly don't all share the same philosophies, but I think what we do share is a commitment to trying to improve things. Now we may have different views about how that's happening, but I don't doubt the commitment of anybody on this platform to trying to improve things and make their community better. And I don't doubt the commitment of any faith community or anybody of faith to doing that as well, which is why, although the mix can sometimes be combustible, I think the mix is valuable and I think the mix is important, and I very much agree with John Wesley.
Thanks. I think the real test for for a person of faith is how you treat people from other faiths or no faith. I think growing up in Northern Ireland with such sectarianism and such segregation going on, everything from, you know, what primary school you went to, right up to what hospital you went to, squads of people working in the major shipbuilding and aircraft building industries grouped by religious background, that kind of thing. I've seen the divisions and splits that can be driven across society whenever people who really have a lot more in common than they have differences get entrenched and ghettoised in their beliefs. I also spent a couple of years working in Mostar, where you have a three-way split there in Bosnia between Muslims, Roman Catholics and Orthodox Christian background people. So yeah, I mean, it fascinates me, these conflicts and these divisions, because I think really people have, you know, more that binds them. And I noticed, like, in the type sheet that we have here, that Steve gave us before we came on, it says, after do religion and politics mix, should the church stay at home and do its knitting? I think the church should go out into the streets and do its knitting. It's how you treat people, it's how you take those values out into the world, it's how you bind people together. Okay, so whatever differences in practices of worship or, you know, tenets and tithes that you may have in your own particular denomination or your own particular faith, or maybe you're an atheist, or maybe you're an agnostic, or maybe you're just not sure, you should be going out there, getting off your backside and going out and trying to help people and trying to bind with other people rather than hunkering up, you know, getting yourself into a kind of mental bunker where you just kind of think that everybody's against you. And you know, I realise that we're in probably the richest part of Bootle constituency for this hustings tonight, but I would say that everybody's got something to offer. Maybe it's their time, maybe it's not about money, maybe it's about what you've got in your heart, and that to me is the most important part of being human and having any kind of faith whatsoever.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of this hosting. Hopefully that's been useful. We haven't got through all the questions that people wanted, but we've had the chance, you know, to hear from our candidates for an hour and 50 minutes. Fair to say they've had a fair grilling in different ways. So we might offer some support for one or other of them next Thursday. But in the meantime, shall we offer our